solve large, intractable problems.
It's a new venture altogether.
Your brain is a wild horse there.
Because remember, writing is not a team sport.
You are not selling horse carriages when there are cars.
I want to be known only as the trusted advisor.
More like a tourist.
Play to Potential podcast.
I never saw anyone prepare better and more intentionally than Sachin Tendulkar, literally day in, day out, week in and week out. And, I was with him from his 18th to 21st year of international cricket. And he was still probably the most diligent practicer of the lot. But at the same time, because of the heights of fame that he had received, in order to keep himself grounded, he would, it's very easy to get caught up in the heights of fame and get blinded by the limelight, because what happens to these athletes, and I see it also with very successful and higher profile businessmen, is people around them treat them, give them special treatment, treat them as VIPs, very important people, or VVIPs. And they start to think, because they're treated as special people, they start to think that they are special people. But the reality is, as human beings, we are all just human beings. And the talents we all have different talents, but that's separate to who we are as a person. And Sachin was just someone who understood that I have a special talent to hit a cricket ball, but that doesn't mean I'm a special person. It means I'm a talented cricketer who needs to also work on being a good person.
Welcome to the 48th conversation at the Play to Potential podcast. This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here. I'm an executive coach, and I engage with organizations and leaders during phases of high-stakes transitions, whether it's related to an organization or the leader's career. I feel that just like companies need to be coherent about the two questions where to play, how to win, in the context of their strategy, we all need to be clear about our responses to the two questions where to go and how to grow. I help leaders play to their unique potential by addressing those two questions, especially during key points of transition, as they go through the journeys. In this podcast series, I talk to leaders from multiple domains: CEOs, sportsmen, artists, thought leaders, and so on three broad themes: leadership, transitions, and careers. Before I get to the next guest of this podcast, a couple of announcements. Number one, I'm really happy to share that the podcast won an award for the quality of its content at the Content Marketing Summit in Singapore a few weeks back. It's arguably the largest content marketing event in Asia Pacific. It was really fulfilling to be recognized at that level. Second, I should also mention that I'm excited about the lineup of podcast guests in the coming weeks. In the pipeline, we really have an interesting set of guests. We have Tasha Eurich, author of the book Insight, and one of the leading thinkers in the area of self-awareness, which is arguably the most important meta skill of the 21st century. We have Professor Linda Grattan, a professor at London Business School and the author of the book 100-Year Life, and how leaders could think about staying relevant in a world where they possibly have to work till their 70s and 80s. We have Alan Eagle, who's co-author of the book $1 Trillion Coach, which is an insight into the methods of Bill Campbell, who's coached the who's who of Silicon Valley. And we have James Clear, the author of the New York Times bestseller Atomic Habits. Stay tuned for all this coming your way in the next few weeks. Now let's dive into the conversation at hand today. My guest today is Paddy Upton. Paddy is a head coach in Professional T20 Cricket, mental coach to professional athletes, executive coach, and professor of practice at Deakin University. He worked as a mental conditioning and strategic leadership coach of the Indian cricket team from 2008. And with Kirsten and Paddy Upton, the team achieved the ICC Top Team Test ranking in 2009 and won the ICC World Cup in 2011. Following this, Paddy was appointed as the performance director of the South African cricket team from 2011 to 2014, during which time they became the first team to simultaneously hold the official ICC World Number 1 ranking in all three formats of the international game. Between 2012 and 2018, he's been head coach in 12 professional T20 cricket seasons for 5 different teams across 3 tournaments. Without further ado, let's dive into the conversation with Paddy Upton. Paddy, thanks so much for making the time. Excited to have you on the Play to Potential podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Deepak.
And congratulations on the launch of the book Barefoot Coach, which I read with a lot of interest, and we would love to dig into the book in a few minutes. But first, I wanted to talk about your journey a little bit, Paddy. You were the fitness trainer for the South African team in the 90s, but in 98, you quit the team stating that something was missing. And then you took a series of experiences that eventually led you to working with Gary Kirsten as the mental conditioning and the strategic leadership coach of the Indian team prior to the 2011 World Cup. I'm curious about how you thought about choices, your why behind some of the choices you made, and your journey in this passage of play.
Very good question, Deepak. If I go back to, the something when I had spent 4 years with the South African cricket team as fitness trainer from 1994 to 1998, working under Bob Woolmer, who was a coach, and Hansie Cronje. The team was a very fit team. Bob Woolmer was probably one of the most forward-thinking and innovative coaches in the cricket world at the time. Hansie Cronje, an incredible leader of men. So it was a very, very good team. And that was a time where I looked at the players and I looked at the team as a whole and felt that there was something missing from. I felt we could be performing better. I felt the team could be doing a whole lot better, but I really didn't know how or what that something missing was. And for me, resigning from that job, that choice was made really intuitively, because I couldn't answer anybody why I left the job. I couldn't answer any questions about, so what was it that was that something missing? It was just a feeling. It was a sense. It was a gut. So that decision to resign from what I really was an ideal, probably a dream job for someone in their mid-20s, was made completely intuitively, and I just followed my gut. I knew I needed to move on in search of whatever might be next. And that was probably one of the first times when I really had the experience of making a significant or even life-changing decision based on intuition or on gut feeling. And in, probably my next sort of significant decision was to spend 2 years, what ended up being 2 years, working as a street worker with some of the hardened and most difficult to work with street dwellers in the Cape Town city centre. When I say street dwellers, they were also the criminals, all of them involved in some shape or another in drugs and various forms of crime. So hardened street children and criminals to a degree. And that too wasn't really a decision. It was something that I found myself just per chance playing soccer with them one day, and then I went back the next week and played soccer with them, and then started spending some time on the streets and started to, without deliberately setting out to do so, to understand how things worked in the Cape Town, sort of the city centre's underbelly of, street children and street youth and crime and movement of, drugs and how things worked. And I ended up just spending 2 years without ever actually making a decision or planning to do so, working with these street children and building a street children's organization. And I guess if I were just to take another step to the right, probably the next big move after I had moved on from that was when a friend told me about this profession called executive coaching, which at the time, that was in the early 2000s. I had never heard of the concept of executive coach. And he explained to me that it was coaching of business executives. And he said there was in fact, what at the time was the world's first 2-year master's degree in getting qualified as an executive business coach. And for me, there was just something about his explanation that in that moment, it's like, yes, that's the something that I think I've been looking for, to really understand the academics and science behind getting the best out of people in a high-performance business-type environment, which cricket or professional sport is a business. So that was a very conscious decision. I felt that could be the path to discovering and that's something missing that I was looking for. And as it turned out, it certainly was the path, and that was the beginning of discovering there's something missing, and that's been the underpinning of still today what I brought into the professional sports world.
Got it. And if I may maybe request you to step away from your journey and look at it objectively, and if I were, let's say, a 20-something-old coming to you for advice on my journey, right, and really say, how should I think about reinventing myself? What are the one or two things that you've learned from the way you've architected your journey?
Wow, that's if someone came to me at as an early 20-year-old and asked me to really reflect on things, I think I was at that stage in my life, if I just personally, where I was really just exploring, experimenting, and probably the best advice I could have got from someone there, and it's in fact what I did for myself, was my mantra is, and someone in the early 20s who really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do for a career. And I think you probably find there's even more of that in this day and age, where there's so many options and so many brand new career paths opening up each month, literally. Is my mantra was to spread my wings as wide as possible and make sure I was moving forward. And what that meant was, by spread wings as wide as possible, is take in as many opportunities, as many experiences, learn as much as possible, get the blinkers off in life, and experience, learn, grow. And the moving forward part was also tied into that, was make sure that I am learning things, that I'm learning about myself, I'm learning about new professions, new options, and just make sure that I was growing myself. And in having that sort of wings spread wide, blinkers off, and make sure I was advancing in terms of learning. If you're playing PlayStation or Xbox, you're not advancing yourself. You're not really learning a whole lot. Yes, there is some advancing your certain skills, but you're not moving forward in life, because you're not going to get the next job because you're a good Xbox player. If you're over socializing, yes, you're having a whole lot of fun, but you're not moving forward in life and building the CV. So the advice I would give would be to, especially in this day and age, is to experience as much as possible, but make sure those are things that are taking you forward in life, that you are learning something that is even adding to your health, advancing your emotional intelligence, advancing your cognitive abilities and capabilities. And I think at the same time, probably my real turnaround in my life came from when I didn't spend the bulk of my time looking externally at the external world, but when I turned the mirror inwardly and started to understand, who am I? What am I? What do I think I'm on this world, on this planet for? What are my strengths? What are the things that happened in my childhood and my upbringing, my personality, my character that shapes who I am? And which of those things need some polishing? Which some of those things need some renovating? So really the journey of personal mastery. And I probably only sort of embarked on that journey very intentionally and deliberately, maybe in my late 20s, probably even early 30s. And I think the sooner somebody can embark on that journey of personal mastery, of reflecting, of looking inward and fine-tuning ourselves as the instrument of leadership, of coaching, of business, of sport, the more we're going to really get a foot up and go forwards in life.
And just to maybe persist with that, Paddy, and when you say you went on that internal journey, could you share how you did it? Was it with the help of somebody, or was it through meditation? Just shed some light on how you've gone about developing deeper clarity on self.
There's probably a whole lot of things that happened that I don't recall now, but some of the things were, I do remember a friend when I was probably 21 or 22 years old, sitting down with me at a restaurant and just completely out of the blue having a lunch. He made a comment that was quite hurtful at the time. He said to me, "Paddy, do you realize that you're nowhere in life?" And I was like, hang on a minute, I'm playing really good representative cricket. I'm playing representative rugby. I'm getting a university degree. I'm healthy. I'm a very social person. I'm very material in all regards as a university student, very successful. But he said to me, yeah, you are very successful, but you're just going nowhere. You're drifting through life. And it upset me at the time. And it was only a lot later that I realized the impact and the value of someone older than me giving me some very direct advice that, although I was really talented at sport and I was intelligent enough to pass university fairly comfortably, I wasn't really applying myself. So that was one of the things that sparked for me. And maybe the advice would be, if you're an elder and you see, don't be scared to give somebody, even if you're just somebody's friend and you see your friend drifting off path, don't be scared to give them some very direct feedback. And similarly, if you're someone who's received some feedback that's difficult to hear, don't just dismiss it, as I did when I was younger. So, and then some of the other things I did was really attend some personal, there's some really good courses out there to begin the journey of personal mastery. So it's either in books. There's a number of books that have been written at the moment, a lot of self-help books and a lot of easily accessible ones. For me, it was reading M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled, which really got me sort of to think a little bit more deeply about myself and my life. And then just attending a few sort of 2-3 day courses like the Landmark Forum I did in the when I was sort of in my late 20s. That was 3 days of getting me to investigate who I am as a person. For men, I'm not sure if it's available in India, but there's a Mankind project that I did when I was younger that also was a real, it was a raw and vulnerable and honest look at what it is to be a man in the world today. And those courses got me to be more reflective, and the next progressions from there for me personally was things like I did, started doing a fair bit of breath work, meditation, and yoga. I found that was also a very nice part to become more reflective and contemplative. And today, again, there's access to so much in the way. Obviously, yoga is very mainstream the world over now. Meditation has been around for a long time, and sort of now the more modern day version we hear is in a lot of in the workspaces, mindfulness. And there's so many apps and cell phones now where you can, do anything from a 3 to a 15-minute mindfulness exercise where someone guides you on a guided meditation or mindfulness exercise on the phone, Right. And those are very valuable. So if I think today compared to 20 years ago, we have so much more access to tools to go and sharpen ourselves as the instrument in our lives through mindfulness, meditation, breath work, yoga. I went at the same time, I went vegetarian for 4 years, which really just helped cleanse my system. And I find that gave me more clarity of thought. It gave me more energy, more vitality, the meats that I was eating before then wasn't necessarily organic, free range, healthy meats. It was, sort of very unethically farmed battery chickens and farmed animals. And I guess all of that stuff, there's so much junk in the food and the drinks that we ingest today, that just creates noise in the body, noise in the mind, noise in the system. And that just constantly takes the edge off us being at our best.
Got it. No, lovely, Paddy. Let's change gears. Would love to talk about the book, The Barefoot Coach. Maybe if you could start by saying why write the book and why now?
Very good question. I think there was 2 main reasons why I wrote the book. One of them was I really know that I have been so gifted and blessed to have been given the opportunities that I've been given in the last over 2 decades now to work with a number of the best, certainly the majority of the best cricketers in the world over the last 2 decades, but a number of the best athletes from more than 10 sports in the world, to travel the world on on cricket tours in different countries with different teams. These have been opportunities that have been gifted to me by other people. And I really wanted to take the best of those experiences and lessons and share them with others, as people have shared the opportunity for me to have those experiences in the first place. So I've always been someone who's benefited from other people's generosity and gifting. And I've always been someone who really likes to share. I feel good when I give other people information or knowledge or the best of my experiences. If I were to just quickly take a step back, when I trained as a sports scientist and a biokineticist in the 1990s, it was a time where the internet wasn't around, and so many people in the medical and the sports science fraternity was coming up with some information that worked, or maybe they came up with a method or a process. And what they did, they'd keep it to themselves. It would be their special secret, and they would hold it to themselves, and only the athletes they worked with would be told or get exposure to this new knowledge or information. And I really never liked that. I was someone who, if I discovered something new, I wanted to share it with as many people as possible, because then as many people as possible could benefit. So I do come from a background of wanting to share. So that was one thing. I've had these wonderful experiences. If I get abducted by aliens or run over by a bus tomorrow, I have all these lessons and knowledge and insights that I would take away with me. So one was to share them with whoever's interested and whoever it might add value to in the world. And the other reason was the coaching, sports coaching. And when I say sports coaching, it's the same as in the same bucket. One could put business leadership, one could put teaching, one could even put parenting. The landscape has fundamentally changed in the last 15 to 20 years in the world, from what was 200 years of the Industrial Revolution, where you had experts being the coach or the business manager or the teacher, and they would tell people what to do. So we lived, most of us, anyone over the age of 35 years old was brought up, or 40 years old, brought up in the old system of command and control, an authoritarian or hierarchical system where a senior would tell a junior what to do, and the junior's job was to follow that instruction and be sort of a yes man or yes woman, and be a good little follower of instruction, a good sheep, so to say. But the advent of the internet has fundamentally changed the way coaches need to coach, leaders need to lead, teachers teach, parents parent, in that now employees, athletes, kids have their own access to all this information out there on the internet. And it's no longer possible for a coach or any person to be the expert in anything anymore. Because on the internet, there's always someone who's coming up with a new information, new ideas, or different ideas. So I had stumbled across one of the something missings that I had seen in the South African cricket team in the 1990s was this leader as content expert approach to coaching and to captaining, and the players weren't taking responsibility for their own learning, their own growth, their own development. They were often leaving it in somebody else's hands. So part of my journey in the last literally 20 years has in discovering that there is a new way of coaching, and which business coaching really has made very explicit and probably done the best job of understanding. I wanted to share with other coaches and with parents a new and a better way of coaching, of leading others to help the people in their charge to grow, to develop, to perform. And that's really my passion. It's almost more coaching coaches and coaching managers is more of a passion than actually coaching individual athletes myself, because I feel the benefit is much more widespread if I can pass knowledge on to coaches who then can pass it on to their 15, 20 players per year in, year out, that they have the privilege of influencing, of helping grow, of develop, and setting them up for success, not only in sport, but for all of life.
And maybe picking up on the key themes or the key dimensions along which coaching today is different from what it was 10, 15 years back, Paddy. What are the fundamental shifts that you see? What are the 3 or 4 dimensions on which you think the coaching today is very different from the industrial age?
Well, let's say that how the coaching should be different today. Not all, in fact, I would say the majority of team sports coaches are still stuck in yesterday's model. But the fundamental difference is yesterday's model, the coach was the expert that told people what to do. Today, the expertise sits within the collective, within the entire team. So instead of telling teams what to do or telling individuals what to do, it's to have dialogues to extract the best thinking that sits within the collective. And it might not sit within the collective, but it might mean someone goes away and does an internet search to bring new information into the system. But no longer do we need to just rely on one individual, be it the coach or the business leader, to bring the information to the party. So one is where the information comes from. The other is, I think, in the learning opportunities, where, mind you, guess that's the same thing. 15 years ago, learning happened from a wire senior. Today, learning happens anywhere on the internet. There's opportunities to learn from anyone at any time in any format, and it's available to the person who's most hungry to go out to learn. So the learning opportunities are far greater. But in the old school command and control learning, the information, as I said, was limited to what was coming from the coach, and people needed to do it the coach's way. So I'd say it's really just, it's knowledge. That's the one fundamental difference between yesterday. Knowledge came from one person who was the coach or the CEO. Today, knowledge can come from anywhere. So it means that we need to help people to learn as opposed to tell them what to do. And there's a fundamental difference between helping somebody learn versus telling them what to do.
Got it. And coming back to your journey, Paddy, you talk about you and the story behind you and Gary coming to work with the Indian team. And you actually mentioned that Gary was selected at the end of 2007 to be the coach for the Indian team. And he'd not coached a cricket team before this, not even his son's under-9 team. And you were taking on a role whose job description didn't exist, mental conditioning and strategic leadership coach. And if you had to be immodest about the selection, give us a little bit of context around how you and Gary got this job.
Deepak, I wish I had have actually asked the question at the time, because I don't know why they would have chosen Gary Kirsten. I could only guess, and my guess is probably only half right at best. That the Indian team had a bit of a rocky road between the players and the previous coach, Greg Chappell. Things didn't work out very well, and Greg Chappell was, in fact, asked to leave before his contract ended. There was just animosity between the players and the coach. So maybe, I don't know, Gary is someone who never had any controversy behind him. He was like the Rahul Dravid in a way. Rahul never really had controversy follow him through his career. He was someone who played 100 test matches. There was still, belief in the system that you needed to be an ex-cricketer in order to be a coach. So I really don't know why they would have chosen Gary. He certainly wasn't an obvious choice. And even at the time when Gary said to the Indian cricket authorities that he wanted me to join him, they wouldn't have it that I would come in as an assistant coach position, although I would be assisting him. But my expertise wasn't in the cricket coaching per se. It was going to be in creating the team, creating the learn environment, creating the culture, and working really just with Gary and the leadership of the team to create the kind of environment that was going to set up the opportunity for every individual, that would get the best out of each individual, allow them to be themselves and fully express themselves. Because there was certainly sufficient talent in the team at the time to be at the top of the world game. That talent just was not really being unleashed. And there was obviously obstacles within the environment, the unhappiness and various things that happen when you have team environments or group environments. Often the group dynamics actually inhibits performance or inhibits individuals' performance rather than really unleashes the full potential of a group of individuals who are very diverse in their needs, learning styles, personalities, etc. So that there wasn't a title for that. And, I think maybe 15 years ago, that wasn't even a thing. There wasn't really an understanding of the value of creating an environment that brought the best out in people. You just sort of shouted at people, and if they didn't bring the best and they didn't give their best, you just shout loud at them or punish them harder.
But with that kind of a construct, I'm curious, how do you know if you're doing a good job? Let's take your particular role, Paddy. I'm curious about these roles in organizations which are enabling kind of roles, where you don't have a quantitative metric which shows outcomes. So in your case, how did you get a sense of how well you were doing along the way?
That's a very good question. That if I were to just stick with sport coaching for now, and listeners could obviously draw their analogy back into their context or translate it back into their context. As a sports coach, there is very little, if any, mechanism to get feedback for how you're doing. Players don't give coaches feedback. That system's not set up. It's not an accepted method of giving feedback in sports environments. Very often the administrators are too far away. They're too far removed from the sport environment, so they don't know just how good a job you're doing. And in sport, we use results. If the team's doing well, we assume that the coach is doing well or is a good coach. And if the team's doing badly, we assume the coach is doing a bad job or is a bad coach, which are woefully inaccurate or incomplete measures of whether a coach is actually doing a good job or not. And similarly with a captain, whether the captain's doing a good job or not. So that's one place where I think there's a very big gap in probably almost all team sports, is how we judge success. In a business environment, the more responsible and the more impactful or successful business environments, they would have mechanisms where you're giving feedback to leaders, to enablers. You have regular feedback systems. But still, I don't think when it comes to the role of enablers that I haven't come across too many environments that have really got it right. And personally, when I go into a corporate environment to do corporate work, and I get asked that question, so how will we be able to measure the success of your intervention? And I think that's probably that in that thinking lies the problem, is that not everything can be measured scientifically. And if we reduce everything to a metric, I think we miss out on a lot of actually what happens and a lot of what it is to be human and operate as a human in this world. So for me, what I would say to someone like that is ask around the staff, ask around in the environment, say, is the environment better? Do you feel that you're able to do better? Do you feel more empowered? Do you feel that you enjoy coming to work more? Are you enjoying your experience in the workplace even more? And do you feel that this in time will translate to you delivering better results? And that's a very, very subjective question, but I think that at least as much as we're looking to measure success, we need to make use of those subjective assessments of the individuals who are receiving the coaching or the enabling.
Got it. No, that makes sense, Paddy. There's no point having a false sense of accuracy by tracking numbers, given the nature of the work that this is. But back to you and Gary working with the Indian team. I'm curious about how people settle into new cultures. In a way, both you and Gary came from a different culture when you started working with the Indian team. So give us a sense of how you built trust with the team in the first, let's say, 3, 6, 9 months. What are some of the things you did to ensure that the team trusted you?
I think, the first was to understand the fact that, one, we were foreigners, so we didn't understand the players, we didn't understand Indians or Indian culture. We also knew that the players had been unhappy under the previous coaching setup. So the first thing we did was to understand the environment as much as possible. Gary met with each of the players individually to asked them what they wanted from Gary, from a coach, from the environment. So I think one of the main things we did was came in and did a lot of inquiring, and that was part of our strategy is let's ask, let's seek to understand before we bring our thinking or impose our thinking or think we know how we can take these individuals of the team forward. So I guess that was one of the main things, was inquiring to understand. And the other thing was our intention, we made it explicit just between the two of us that we didn't want to present anything that the players would be able to resist. So our thing was nothing to resist. We don't want the players to come up against us. And one of the ways to do that was to be really, really explicit, was that everything we did was to serve the players to their agendas, their learning, their development needs, and whatever it is that they wanted to accomplish out of being an international cricketer playing for their country. And if we were serving the players the whole time and very aware of the very attractive and very, very attractive and fairly pervasive trap that coaches or leaders fall into, is serving their own agendas, or coming from the position of ego where they want to look good, want to make an impression, want to succeed, or whatever it is that they're looking to get for themselves. We were very mindful of the fact that we do have egos, we have agendas, we have things that we want to accomplish. We want to be successful. We want people to think that we're doing a good job. But all of that is coming from ego and serving ourselves and our needs, our agendas. So it was something that we really kept each other in check with, very closely, very intentionally, and literally on a daily basis, to make sure everything we said, everything we did, all the planning we did, the interactions we had, was about serving the players' learning, growth, and development needs, and moving our own agendas as coaches aside. And I think if I were to sort of pinpoint one thing that probably helped us get that traction, and it certainly didn't happen immediately, it took a long time for players to get a sense that these guys are actually here to help us, to serve us. They're not here to serve their own needs. So when we asked players what they want, they would actually tell us what they wanted, because they knew that we were asking them for a very good reason. So that was probably the key thing, was keeping our egos in check and making sure we served the players ahead of ourselves.
This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here. If there is one thing that's come up in my various conversations at the podcast in the context of leaders settling in effectively, I would say that one thing is listening. Do look up the playlist Settling into a New Context in the curated playlist section of the podcast. You could do this at playtopotential.com. I was talking to Professor Michael Watkins, who teaches at IMD at Lausanne in Switzerland and is a leading thinker in accelerating integration into a new context, and he speaks about the need for listening and creating feedback loops.
I'm a huge believer in providing structured feedback after, pick a number, 90 to 120 days, certainly not longer than that, because that provides some discipline, in the sense of giving some serious structured guidance to the new leader upon which they can act before things have gotten to a point where, there are very serious things going on. And so, can the leader do that themselves? Absolutely. Should they? For sure.
If you have an external coach doing this, it's great. But otherwise, you have to take ownership of feeling the temperature in the room in the first couple of months as you settle in. I see too many people focusing on quick wins, trying to prove how great they are, and focusing on winning in the market. But what they miss is if you don't win in the system, then it's hard for you to win in the market. Several people have asked me why I run the podcast and what's the commercial case behind it. As you would appreciate, it does take quite a bit of effort to research for a conversation, conducting the interview, editing it, cross-referencing it, breaking it into nuggets, and then sharing it with you. I pour a significant amount of time, thought, heart, and resources into this podcast, which remains free and ad-free. And if you're deriving value from the podcast, and want to support it, I would like to make a couple of requests. You could show your gratitude in a couple of different ways. One is if you could take a couple of minutes and rate and review the show on iTunes or whichever platform where you consume this content. It will help others benefit from this. Second, do also consider sharing your gratitude for this podcast with an organization I work with closely. This is Antarang Foundation, a not-for-profit organization based in Bombay that envisions a world where every young adult is productively, passionately, and positively engaged in a career of his or her choice. The one thing I believe in is that talent is uniformly distributed in the world, but unfortunately opportunity is not. Antarang helps the youth play to the unique potential by keeping them in education, by driving self-discovery, building real-life skills, and by making meaningful market connects in the world of work. Ensuring that the youth in India are productively employed is not just a problem for them, but for us as a society. Please visit antarangfoundation.org to know more. You could contribute either financially or by employing some of these alumni. I must mention that the two editors of this podcast are alumni from Antarang Foundation. They came in with no prior experience in the field, but had fire in the belly to learn and grow into the role. Here's another leader speaking about his experience with Antarang alumni. I spoke to Arvind Subramanian, CEO of Mahindra Happinest, the affordable housing business of the Mahindras. Here's Arvind speaking about why he recruited from Antarang.
To be honest, Deepak, our journey recruiting from Antarang started with entirely selfish objectives. As an affordable housing business, our target audience is the lower income families in India. And we were clear from the outset that in order to succeed, we would need to rethink every aspect of our business, whether it's the product, how we sold, or how we constructed. So as we were building out our new team, we asked ourselves whether it would be possible to embed talent from our target customer groups, which is the lower income families, into our organization. And our hope was this would help us think along with these customer groups rather than think for or on behalf of them.
I work closely with the founder Priya Agrawal and the leaders at Antarang and can vouch for the quality of their work and the impact they're having. Their website, once again, is antarangfoundation.org. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Paddy Upton. And you and Gary also talk about setting out 4 goals for the Indian cricket team when you took on the responsibility. It was interesting to see that 2 of them were outcome related and 2 process related, right? The 4 which I read in your book were becoming the number 1 test team in the world. That was number 1. Winning the 2011 ICC World Cup. That was number 2. Creating a happy team environment was number 3. And helping players become better people was number 4. And it's interesting, 1 and 2, one is, it's easy to understand their outcomes. Everyone's striving to be the best team and win the big competitions. But give us a sense of how you ended up with 3 and 4 as well.
It's interesting that you point out now that there were 2 outcome and 2 process goals. We certainly didn't set them out deliberately in that way. I guess in order to achieve those very clear metrics of becoming the number 1 team and winning the World Cup, there were certain things that needed to happen to set ourselves up with the best possible chance of that transpiring. And I guess if I think the 2 goals, one was of the goal 3, happy team, was sort of team or environment or culture related. So that related to the collective. And the 4th goal, individuals being better people, was very individually focused. And I guess that just comes from the real belief that, or the buy into, for example, what I think Peter Drucker is attributed to saying that, culture eats strategy for breakfast. In this modern day of science and technology, everyone has access, certainly in a sporting environment, to the same data, the same video analysis, the same technologies, the same training information, the same dietary information. So there's no real competitive advantage to be gained through the sports sciences, I don't think, as there was maybe 15 years ago when one team was using video analysis and one wasn't, or one team had a fitness trainer and another team didn't, or one team had made use of a very good biokineticist or chiropractor in preventing injuries, and the other teams only had physiotherapists who were treating injuries. So 15 years ago, one could gain a competitive advantage through the science, sports science. Today, through the internet, everyone has access to that, and that almost should be a given. So the advantage, Gary and I certainly believed, is in systems that get the best out of individuals. And one gets that through creating an environment or a culture within the team that really gets the best out of people, that allows them to be themselves, allows them to fully express their talents, and removes any of the naturally occurring obstacles to expression, to creativity, to innovation, to performance that happen in almost all professional environments. And if I were just to take a quick step back and give some context to that answer, is in the time that between when I qualified as a business coach in about 2003 and Gary pulled me into the work with the Indian team 2007, I spent that 4.5 years or so largely working with individual athletes as a mental coach. And it was fascinating when I went into that path. I thought I would be helping these athletes take their game to the next level, because everyone says the mental game is so important. And if you can, the mentally fitter or stronger you are, the better you're going to perform. But I ended up being disappointed in that journey, because I would say, if I were just to do a thumbs up guess, that possibly 80% of the conversations I had with athletes weren't about taking their performance to the next level. It was actually about having a conversation to try and get them back to feeling okay, or to there not being problems or obstacles to them performing just at their current best, never mind moving to the next level. And if I were to take those 80% of conversations, there were two main areas of conversation. One was off-field or non-sports related distractions, are a significant obstacle to professional athletes' performance. Things like financial problems, problems with their partners, wives, girlfriends, illnesses in the family, fights with friends, things that happen away from the sporting environment. And there's no real place in this day and age in the sporting environment to actually process that or have those conversations. So those often would just get stuck in players' heads, and particularly players who are on tour for a long period of time. If they're having an argument or fight with their wife or their partner, very seldom they actually bring that conversation into the team environment. So they just carry that burden for the duration of the tour. And the other obstacle, other than off-field distractions, is environmental or factors within the team culture that is holding them back from performing at their highest potential. And the common things that players would bring up would be things like, I think we're training too hard or too long and I'm too tired, or I think the training we're doing is not really helping my game. If I was able to do things differently, I think I'd improve faster. Things like, I don't like the way the coach is speaking to me, or I'm being asked to play a role that is actually not playing to my strengths. If I was given another role, I think I'd be able to deliver a lot better for the team. Often it was cliques or fractures in the team where players were being marginalized or sidelined or victimized in some way within the team environment. And again, these were all obstacles to performance in that they were inhibiting a player's full expression of their talent and experience in the environment. So that informed to a large degree the strategy that we came up and the goals we had with the Indian cricket team. We knew we had to create a team environment where nothing happened that would make a player unhappy, would be asking them to do things that they didn't want to do or weren't good at doing or that worked against them. Number one, so to remove the obstacles, which would then just allow their natural talent, their natural personality, their natural flair to come out. So at least we could be getting the best out of individuals. And again, research suggests that in most group environments or sport and team environments, both in sport and businesses, there are a number of self or internally imposed obstacles to success. So the happy team environment spoke to, we wanted to create an environment where there aren't internal obstacles blocking players' expression. personally and on their expression on the sports field and the practice grounds. And the other points, players being better people, that's, that's even a longer answer, but essentially, the more grounded, the more secure an individual is within who they are as a person. In other words, the higher their self-esteem is, independent of results, whether they do well or do badly, whether they dropped or selected. If they've got very high levels of self-esteem, that removes some very natural mental obstacles to success as well. And if I were to, again, the two biggest obstacles to success around the mental game in all professional sports, I would say, is number one is pressure, and number two is fear of failure. Both of those are directly attached to results. Pressure coming from the amount of importance we place on a result. The more important the result we feel a result is, the more pressure we feel. And fear of failure, again, the more the fear of failure is, the more likely someone is to tighten up, to choke, and to actually then fail. So, and both pressure and fear of failure is directly related to results, where the individual is relating their self-worth or their self-value. I need to do well, or I really need not to fail. And normally that is at a deeper psychological level. It's because of how it makes them feel as a person. But if you can have someone be completely secure within who they are as a person, then it's not that important to win, and it's not that important or that damaging if they lose or happen to drop a catch. It's okay. They understand it's okay. It's part of the game. So that individual, and there are, individuals who you'll find that the more secure they are within themselves, the less mental pressures or mental obstacles or mental problems they have in the sporting environment. And the less secure someone is, the more they have psychological or mentally related errors that they make on the sports field because they're desperate to win, or they really don't want to make a mistake or do badly, which actually forces that error.
And just picking up on that piece around helping players become better people, in the book you also talk at length about the notion of personal mastery, not just professional mastery. And you talk about Sachin Tendulkar as an individual who's pursued personal mastery along with professional mastery. I'm curious about what are some of the things that you saw him do which enabled him to go on this quest of mastery.
I think if you take Sachin as probably the prime example, and maybe more recently you'd have Dhoni and Kohli, who's similar examples of people who have reached such high levels of fame in a country of over 1 billion people, where there is an absolute fanaticism, not only for cricket, but for cricketers. So these guys, and Sachin obviously at the time was and still is a demigod in the country. And Sachin it was difficult to see what he did in his own private time, but I was able to see the fruits of him keeping his feet in the ground and having personal mastery as an intentional pursuit. And, I mentioned the book, and in fact, Sachin told the story of himself when he first made the Indian cricket team as a 16-year-old. And when he came back from that tour, one of his teammates and very good friends saying to him that, Sachin, we recognize you're a better cricketer than us, but since you made the Indian team, you're acting as if you're a more important person than us. And as a group of friends, we don't like that. And Sachin highlights that as one of the high moments in his career, one of the most significant, moments in his career, when he was really able to realize the difference between being a good cricketer and being a human being, where yes, he was a great cricketer, but it doesn't mean that he is now a great human being or superior or more important human being to his friends. And at the time, he also mentioned that his father had spoken to him about that, your results on the field, people will very quickly forget them. If you score 100 and you score the 0 the next week, they'll forget your 100. Or you score a 0 and you score 100 the following week, people will forget that. But they will always remember the impact you have on them as a person. So from a young age, his father had delivered that message. Then it was reinforced as a 16-year-old by his friends, saying who you are as a person is separate from the results you achieve on the sports field. And with Sachin having that awareness and being such a consummate professional and someone who leaves no stone unturned, literally on a daily basis to try and improve who he is as a person and who he is as a cricketer, he was very intentional about improving his game of cricket. I never saw anyone prepare better and more intentionally than Sachin Tendulkar, literally day in, day out, week in and week out. And, I was with him from his 18th to 21st year of international cricket. And he was still probably the most diligent practicer of the lot. But at the same time, because of the heights of fame that he had received, in order to keep himself grounded, he would, it's very easy to get caught up in the heights of fame and get blinded by the limelight. Because what happens to these athletes, and I see it also with very successful and higher profile businessmen, is people around them treat them, give them special treatment, treat them as VIPs, very important people, or VVIPs. And they start to think, because they're treated as special people, they start to think that they are special people. But the reality is, as human beings, we are all just human beings. And the talents we all have different talents, but that's separate to who we are as a person. And Sachin was just someone who understood that I have a special talent to hit a cricket ball, but that doesn't mean I'm a special person. It means I'm a talented cricketer who needs to also work on being a good person. And I think in this day and age, what we're seeing is athletes are being more and more exposed for who they are as people. Where I certainly know, being involved in international cricket 25 years ago, a really talented cricketer could be an unsavory character, and only the people in the immediate surroundings might experience that person as being very selfish or very divisive, or an unsavory, whatever it might be. And the greater population never really got to know about that, so they often got away with it. But in this day and age, with social media and cell phone cameras, and every time someone goes in the public, their behavior is seen and recorded. And even if it's not recorded on a camera, someone should see someone's unsavory behavior, they can always put that out, a post on social media, and share it with everyone. So players' behavior is far more closely scrutinized today. So it's even more important that successful individuals understand and work on who they are as people, and at the same time as they continue working on whatever their professional talent or skill is. And we're seeing in the cricket world now, those individuals who are known as divisive or not really team men or overly selfish, they're actually, even though they're highly talented, they're actually not getting picked, for example, in some of these T20 leagues or in teams in these T20 leagues, because they're known to be people who might undermine a team culture, which, goes back to what we're talking about with the Indian cricket team. If you've got a really divisive individual, I think what Jack Welch in his book spoke about, a cancer in the team. You want to be removing that, or not employing it, or not hiring it, or removing it as quick as possible before it actually spreads and starts contaminating the rest of the system.
And as a mental conditioning coach, Paddy, what are some of the things you did on the non-cricketing stuff? Going back to the notion of personal mastery, what are one of the two things you did as a mental conditioning coach for people to go on a journey there?
That would just be a personal conversations, asking players, for example, one day when you leave the sport, or when you retire, I would ask players to actually write down, if you have a really great career where you deliver on all of your potential, both on and off the field, what would you love people to say about you? And I would ask people to write down, what do you want your teammates to say about you? So they could make it explicit, what does it look like when I'm a great team man? What do your coaches want to say about you? What do you want your competitors to say about you? That he was, a really nasty person who verbally abused and sledged us. Or do you want to say he was a very fair competitor, and although he was tough, I really respect the individual? I asked them what they wanted their friends to say about them. Some players rise to fame, and I speak to their friends and they say, well, he's no longer our friend anymore now that he's famous and he thinks he's better than we are. Or even no matter how famous he's actually still the same person. He's still a great friend. He's still really generous, and we really support him, because at some point every celebrity is going to fall off the center stage and out of the limelight, and that's where you really need your friends. I'd ask them what their family wanted to say, what they wanted their kids to say about them. Dad was very successful, but he was never home. And then I would also get players to write, if you got things wrong, what would people say to you, and what would you not want these various people to say to you? The example I've given already, you wouldn't want your kids to say to you, you were so successful, but you were never at home, or when you're at home, you're never really there for us. You're always on your phone, So I would get players to project to the end of their career and understand what would be a great scenario and what would be an unfortunate scenario. And then I would get players to reflect, well, where are you at the moment if you were to retire now, with regards to that unfortunate and that great scenario. And most players were at a 5, 6, 7 out of 10. If 10 out of 10 was, I'm at my perfect scenario. So then the conversation would be in all those different areas of your life, none of them cricket related, with regards being a parent, with regards being a friend, with regards managing your health, being a competitor. How could you be even a better person than what you are at the moment? So that would be one exercise that I might do. I would ask people to define success. And more often than not, people would be stuck with that question. They've never really thought about what success is. Is it making the Indian cricket team, winning a World Cup, having X crore rupees in your bank account, or what would success look like? And when we start looking at all the material and measurable or tangible measures of success, what most people realize is how incomplete that measure of success is. And then they start adding things like, well, the amount of love that I have maybe in my life with people close to me, the amount of joy, the amount of contentment or peace or in my life, or security, or whatever might be important. And then we go, okay, so how would you go in the pursuit of that? And you realize you go in the pursuit of joy and peace in a very different way. It's an inward journey rather than an outward journey. So there's so many amazing ways out there to get people to just pause for a moment and reflect on who are you being and how in your life, and how well are you managing in the area of being as opposed to doing.
This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here. I'm a big believer that leadership is not just about what you're doing, but as much about who you're being. If that's the case, it really matters how you show up at work and in the various domains of life. To that point, I do think it's difficult to isolate professional mastery and personal mastery. I do think they go hand in hand. One is about evolving on the doing front, the other is about evolving on the being front. I spoke to the former world number 1 in chess, Vishy Anand, on this podcast, and he spoke about how he tried to stay grounded as he reached stratospheric heights in the game.
Well, what am I supposed to do exactly differently? I sort of understand what you're saying, but I found that quite a lot of people that are famous or successful remain in some fundamental way the way they are. I think it's connected to upbringing. My parents brought me up in a certain way. There were certain things that they did, and there are certain things that are obvious that they wouldn't do, and you kind of approach it like that. And essentially, with your family, with your schoolmates, you can't suddenly act differently, because they'll immediately just say, well, what's wrong with you? So you have to act normal. With fans and so on, it's not like I make a huge effort, but I make an effort to be friendly and nice, because at some level I'm aware that I have a job because of them. I don't think it's not obvious to me what exactly I should do differently. There are times I feel that I'm trying too hard to be nice and that people are invading my space, and then sometimes the next time I'll try to impose it a bit more.
Sure.
But generally, I do what I'm comfortable with, and I'm I'm a fairly relaxed person as such. And I don't like getting in conflicts with people, and so I gravitate to that approach.
The one thing I've noticed is that people who do this naturally often struggle to break down what they're doing. But you can hear from the tone of the voice how grounded he is as a person in the way he comes across. Picking up from earlier, here's Arvind Subramanian speaking about the value of Antarang alumni.
So far, we've hired young professionals from Antarang's Career Ready program into two functions at Mahindra Happiness. One is sales and the other is our construction management function. On both these sides, on both these fronts, our experience has been very heartening. These professionals we've hired have demonstrated a very high success-oriented behavior and are valued high-performing members of their teams. They have a hunger to learn, they're contributing strongly to the business growth, and quite honestly, we couldn't have asked for more from a fresh hire.
Do visit antarangfoundation.org for more details if you're deriving value from the podcast and want to share your gratitude. For more content of the podcast, please visit playtopotential.com. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Paddy Upton. Moving to a different player, I really loved one of the examples you give in the book. You talk about Gautam Gambhir, and you speak about him hitting the ball square of the wicket, and he was striving to hit straighter towards mid-off, and you were trying to talk about how to bring that change. And what I really liked was you let Gautam develop his own narrative to get to the right outcome. And you talk about a couple of instances where experts, quote unquote experts, tell him what to do, and that doesn't work. But when you let him figure it out, he somehow pieces it together. So could you sort of draw out the insight here for the purpose of the listeners?
I think the summary that you gave there really is the crux of it. Is yesterday's model of leadership and coaching was telling people an expert telling people what to do, and we know that's far less effective than when we have a process of helping an individual go inward and come to their own learning, their own understanding, and come up with their own narrative of what is going on for them, and also finding their own way to solve, if it's a problem they need to solve, but finding that solution for themselves. So it's a lot more empowering, and that's really what happened with Gambhir. With the problem is you had three experts telling him how to solve this problem of hitting the ball square of the wicket when he was wanting to hit it straighter. And none of those worked. And then he turned to me for the answer, expecting me then to give a fourth pearl of wisdom. And the three people that already offered wisdom had far superior batting knowledge than what I had. So it was almost bizarre that Gautam should be asking me. But then I turned back to a very, the essence of what coaching and business coaching was I asked him to come up with his understanding of what he felt was going on. And initially he said he didn't know what the problem was. And each time he would get it right, he would say to me, "What did I do?" And I'd say to him, "Well, I'm noticing something different, but I don't know what it is exactly that I'm noticing, but it is different." And I kept asking him, "So what is it that you're noticing?" And he didn't know. And then he would get it wrong. He would say, "Okay, so I did something different there. What was it?" And instead of telling him what I saw, I kept probing and asking him, "So what did you feel? What was your experience?" Because there is something different. The outcome is different, so there must be a different set of inputs or processes. And I just kept probing and kept probing. And the tempting thing is to quickly jump in as a coach with a solution. One, I get to be seen to know what I'm talking about. And we fast track that period of discomfort that Gautam was in, because now he's all of a sudden got his answer. But I left him in the discomfort of searching for the answer. Keep searching, keep searching. It will come if you listen closely enough and you pay enough attention to what's going on for you in this moment. And he did come to the understanding of what had actually changed. And his narrative was actually, as I share in the book, the way he changed his technique. It had nothing. He would just glance down at his feet twice, and that would help him hit the ball straight. Now, there is no technical connection between looking twice at your feet and hitting the ball square of the wicket versus straight to the wicket. But that was his narrative that he had come up with that helped his body knowledge or his body intelligence connect in with what works and what doesn't. And as it turned out, that certainly did help him improve his batting technique. But the important thing was it was his story that he had come up with, and his story, it doesn't matter whether his story was right or wrong, but his story connected with the inner wisdom of his body. And that's certainly in a lot of sports, a sport like batting, like bowling, there is so many muscles and nerves and neurons that need to fire in exactly the perfect sequence for everything to work right. And it's actually not possible to go in and break that down into its component parts and come up with an explanation, even though the world of science that we go through and coaching suggests that you can break a bowling or batting action down into its component parts. It's actually not possible. The individual needs to actually, it's something that happens at a much more complex and internal knowledge and system that needs to happen. And I guess I'd helped Gotham to plug into and understand and give language to what worked and what didn't work for himself.
Got it. And moving to a different topic, Paddy, I want to talk about a couple of instances from about 10 days back, right, where we saw really two great sporting events go down to the wire, right? The ICC World Cup and Wimbledon finals. And I want to sort of zoom in on Federer and Kane Williamson. Both of them ended up on the losing side, but both of them were extremely graceful in the way they dealt with defeat. And back to your experience, Paddy, you worked with multiple teams and sportsmen, and I'm sure you've had your share of looking at players dealing with failure. What do you see great players do in the way they deal with failure and the way they rise beyond that event?
I think that those great players who deal with failure really well is because they're well, if I had to go to Kane Williamson, who I know pretty well, he is not attached to winning and losing. He doesn't attach his self-value. He doesn't attach a deep meaning to winning and losing. For Kane Williamson, it's about practicing as best possible, serving his team as best possible, leading as best possible, coming up, getting all his processes right. And if you get all your processes right and you conduct yourself in the correct manner in the execution of those processes, if that's what's really important and you believe in, which Kane definitely does believe in, that sets up with the best possible chance of winning. And I think that's why a team like New Zealand, they certainly didn't have as talented a team as the Indian team who never made it to the finals. They probably weren't even more talented than the South African team or the Pakistan team. They weren't the best team there, but they were a team where you had a leader who was able to get the best out of individuals because of their attachment to good process and their unattachment to whether they won or they lost. So it's that deeper wiring and that understanding, that maturity that Kane Williamson had that allowed him, when they lost the game, to be able to turn around and go, we gave it our all, we're very happy with what happened, and it's unfortunate that we lost. If there's a desperation to win, the New Zealand team wouldn't have got as far as they got. They wouldn't have got to the final because they would have succumbed to the pressure as a result of desperation and importance of winning early on in the tournament. And I think someone like a Roger Federer, he's won enough. He doesn't need to win, and he's not terrified of losing. He plays his best tennis, and he's secure enough within who he is as a person that he's able to deal with losses fairly comfortably. Because in our wisdom, and it's actually in our common sense, the reality is, as an athlete, you will lose. Full stop. As a cricketer, you will drop a catch. Full stop. You will get out when you don't want to get out as a batsman. As a bowler, you will get hit for 4 or 6 when you really don't want to get hit for 4 or 6. So that is an absolute guaranteed. So what is the point of getting upset when something that is absolutely guaranteed happens anyway? What's important is that you engage in the best possible processes to prevent that happening, or to set up for success. And it's the same in a business context. You will lose business deals that you really believed and you wanted to get. That happens. The only value when things go wrong is to look at, okay, so what are all the things that I did in the lead up to that I could learn from, and next time I could do better. And on the day of execution, whether it was Roger Federer in the tennis match, Kane Williamson, or the businessman who doesn't get the business contract, what are the things that I can learn from that if I'm in that situation again next time, that I would do differently? And we accept the loss, number one, process the whatever emotion, extract the lesson, and then move on. Because what to do? What's happened has already happened. So that's that maturity that Federer had, that Williamson had, and the best athletes in the world who handle failure well, they have that mature and rounded approach to understanding that mistakes happen, deal with it, learn from them, improve, pick your head up, look forward, and move on.
This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here. This reminds me of a segment from my conversation with Matt Dixon, a well-accomplished triathlon coach in California. I asked him about how elite athletes think about success and failure, and he spoke about the systems versus outcomes orientation of these athletes. He also said something very interesting about the first 24 to 72 hours after a big failure.
And I think there's a phase or a series of phases that you go through. The first is to lean into the grieving of it. And so when an athlete has a bad race, the first thing that we avoid is immediate analysis, trying to find the solution or the reason for that failure within the first 48 hours. Because it's impossible to think logically, think clearly, and objectively and analyze yourself and how you went into that race with a clear head when you have the pain that is there. So instead, we give, and we talk about this, the grieving process. We give you, for the athlete, 24 to 72 hours, depending on the size of the event or the impact that it's had on them, just to let it marinate. And then we go through and we do a really objective analysis. And I think this is really important, not just in failure, but also in success. Why did we succeed? And why did we fail? And when we think about that component, we look at, it really anchors on controllable and things that were out of your control. So did you do everything that was necessary that you were trained to do in order to be successful? And those are the areas that are actionable.
The insight around leaning into the grief and not debriefing too quickly is a critical one, I think. I guess it's critical for us to realize that we're all human and give ourselves some time to gather our emotions and our objectivity before we start doing a post-mortem on what happened. For more on this, you might want to listen to Nugget 46.06 from Matt Dixon at playtopotential.com. You might also find the curated playlist Resilience in the website Relevant. Picking up from earlier, here's Arvind Subramanian speaking about the difference Antarang alumni have made to his organization.
So how have we benefited from this association with Antarang? I think it's at two levels. One, bringing on board smart and driven talent, people who are keen to and almost eager to seize the opportunities in front of them. That in itself is wonderful value in today's talent market. But beyond that, I think there has been a lot of subliminal learning, if I could call it that, around our teams getting a lot more aware and sensitive to the attitudes, behaviors, and motivations of our target customers. This in turn is finding its way into our product propositions and our communication with our target customers. And that, as I mentioned, was the original objective with which we set out on this journey. So all in all, it's been a very rewarding journey, and we have every intention of building further on it.
Do visit antarangfoundation.org for more details. For more content at the podcast, please visit playtopotential.com. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Paddy Upton. The other piece I wanted to talk about, Paddy, was how cricketers need to manage their minds when they're in the field. Let's take a batsman's perspective. I'm curious about how they change the aperture at different points in time, right? One is about staying present to the next ball that's coming their way, but also zooming out to understand the broader context in terms of how the innings is progressing. So how does one prepare one's mind in being able to zoom in and zoom out appropriately? And in what ways is this different, let's say, in a T20 versus a one day or a test cricket?
I guess the foundation of that understanding is one, to have the awareness of the fact that the mind, and in the sport, does demand at times the mind to be very narrowly focused on the task at hand. So batsman watching the ball, or bowler just watching the area they want to land the ball. And also the mind, the focus can be very broad in terms of taking in the field placings and the scoreboard and the situation of the game. And in a game of cricket, for example, and we can translate it into any other context, the mind does need to go from a very narrow focus on the task at hand, when the bowler's running up to bowl, for example, to between balls, relaxing and broadening that focus to be able to take in a whole lot more information. So one is to have the awareness that that is naturally what happens when a player is in the zone or when things are working really well. The next piece on top of that is having the moment-by-moment awareness of what is happening around me at the moment in the field and what is important now. So when a sportsman loses focus, it's generally because they've lost awareness or they've lost the mindfulness in that present moment, mindfulness, and their mind has either drifted, it's got stuck in the past, a past event that it can't let go of. Maybe they've just a fielder's dropped a catch and he can't let go of the fact he's dropped a catch, or a bowler's bowled a bad ball and he's got hit for 4 and he's running up to bowl the next ball and he can't let go of the fact that he's disappointed and upset about the previous delivery. In that moment, that athlete has lost perspective, or they've lost focus, or they've lost present moment awareness because their mind is stuck in the past. Similarly, it happens that an athlete or anyone can have our mind stuck in the future, worrying about something that might go wrong in the future, or trying to premeditate a success or fast track to success, which makes us impatient or premeditate or creates a fear of failure or desperation to win or be the hero. In that moment, the mind is stuck in the future, on the future event, when it actually needs to be focused on the present moment and what is required in this moment right now. So that's really the academic understanding of, one, in a present moment, how broadly or narrowly does the mind need to be focused, but most importantly, that things work when we are fully present to what is unfolding in front of us right now, which has given rise to, in the corporate space and in the world, the concept and the popular notion of mindfulness. And mindfulness is really about bringing our mind and our focus of attention acutely into the moment and into what is happening in and around me now. When that's happening, an athlete or an individual, even in our lives, we have our best chance of being maximally effective. And we lose our effectiveness when we're stuck in the past, or when we're over-focused and stuck in the future. So the value of the past really is to extract lessons and then to let it go. The value of the future is to look into the future, maybe look at goals, maybe look at scenarios, maybe look at visions, or look into the future with sort of a guiding light. See, where do I want to go? Use that understanding to be able to then say, okay, so what do I need to do in order to get there? And then we bring our focus of attention back fully into the present moment. And that really is the theory of how to be most effective in sport or in life. And when it's much more difficult to actually execute, because I've listened to some wisdom teachers who suggest that most human beings spend upwards of 95% of our waking hours not present, i.e., daydreaming about the future, or stuck and mulling and not being able to let go of something that happened in the past. And that's where exercises like mindfulness, like meditation, like very intentional yoga, for example, like breathwork, is actually practice at being present And the more we practice at being present, the more we're able to, in a sports field, for example, remain present to what is happening and unfolding in front of us now.
Got it. Paddy, just one more question, and then I wanted to wrap up with a rapid fire set of questions, if that's okay with you. In the book, you also talk about the similarity of traits between psychopaths and mentally tough athletes. And you actually go on to say that mental toughness is possibly the wrong tree to climb. I was curious about this phrase. It was quite provocative. Give us a sense of what the insight is here.
I think briefly that mental toughness is a word is very widely used. But when we have a closer look at it, we see that the word there's actually no such thing as mental toughness. It's like Batman and Superman. We know them, but they don't exist. And it's the same with mental toughness. And if I went and had a look through over 30 of the academic papers published in peer-reviewed academic journals on mental toughness. And there was over 40 researchers that had been the authors of those 30 plus papers. And not one of those papers or researchers could agree on a definition of mental toughness. So if the experts can't even agree on what it is, how are you and I meant to decipher what this thing is that experts can't even define? What they went on to do is saying, well, there's actually you can't define mental toughness, but what we can do is we can break it down. It's actually made up of a set of subcomponents like grit, determination, focus, resilience, etc. And when we look through those 30-odd papers, there's in excess of 75 different subcomponents that theoretically make up mental toughness, which makes it an almost impossible thing to accomplish by definition. So that's the one side. So from a research and a scientific perspective, it doesn't actually exist. It's just a term that we tend to bandy about, commentators and spectators and coaches and parents and athletes, although we don't really know what we're talking about. One of the problems is when they've gone and studied now, studies have on mental toughness have studied what they call the mentally the strongest athletes. And when we look at a list of psychopathic traits and we look at a list of the mental toughness traits, they're almost exactly the same. And what I contend, and I put out there, I'm happy to be wrong, but why is it that the psychopathic traits and the traits of mental toughness are almost exactly the same? And I would suggest that the researchers have actually studied the psychopathic traits of athletes, because that psychopathic traits actually do set people up for success in sport. So without going too far down that rabbit hole, the reality is almost every single human being other than out-and-out psychopaths, and this is important, every human being, athletes, business people, kids, parents, teachers, other than psychopaths, have some form of doubts or vulnerabilities or insecurities or negative thoughts or fears, etc. That is perfectly normal. The problem in sport is those things are all labeled as mental weakness, mental fragility, or mental softness, which that really for me is the crux of the problem. Those beings having doubt, insecurity, vulnerability, and negative thoughts is not mental weakness. It is not mental softness. It is perfectly normal human characteristics. Every single top athlete that I've worked with in over 10 sports, and it's over hundreds of athletes now, other than the odd few out-and-out psychopaths, every single one of those athletes suffers doubts, vulnerabilities, negativities, insecurities. And that's perfectly normal. And as a mental coach, I do not try and coach those people to get rid of those things, because you can't get rid of them, because it's part of our DNA as human beings. It's just that people come to me and they say, I get really nervous before an event. Can you help me get rid of the nerves? It's like, no, that's normal. Why would you want to get rid of something that's normal? Learn to keep focus and work with your doubts, your vulnerabilities, your insecurity, your nerves. Those things are there just to highlight the fact and confirm the fact that you're human. But what's important is while those things are going on, the best athletes in the world are able to fully and acutely focus on the task at hand and execute on the task at hand, even though they may have doubts or insecurities or negative thoughts about it. They're still fully committed and focused on the task at hand with those things going on, but they're faded more into the background and they're not in the foreground of their thoughts.
Got it. Lovely, Paddy. It's been really insightful talking to you. I wanted to wrap up this conversation by 5 quick rapid-fire questions. I'd love to get a top-of-mind reaction to these questions. First, cricketer who trains the hardest?
Tendulkar trained the hardest. In the nets, Kohli, probably from a physical fitness perspective. Sorry, I cannot believe Steve Smith out of that equation. That wasn't so rapid.
Got it. That's all right. The individual who's most open to feedback and development?
JP Durmani, Kane Williamson, Rahul Dravid.
And if you want to add a line of context, that's fine too.
Okay. Yeah, there's a number of athletes I've worked with who are very open, but those come immediately to mind.
And a player who's a great human being and whom you respect for his or her values on and off the field?
Rahul Dravid, VVS Laxman.
The captain you respect the most?
Kane Williamson, and Owen Morgan.
And a one-liner on why? What about the captaincy that appeals to you?
Kane Williamson, so hungry to learn new things, to grow, and such a maturity for his age in terms of lack of attachment to ego. And Owen Morgan, similarly, real lack of attachment to ego. And lack of attachment to ego means lack of self-involvement and there to serve the people and that they're charged to serve.
Sure. And finally, the coach that you admire the most?
There's a few coaches I really admire. Trevor Bayliss for his real calmness. I admire Gary Kirsten, Stephen Fleming, and maybe a slightly lesser known. Eric Simons is probably one of the wisest individuals with an amazing amount of depth as a human being. Of most coaches I've come across.
Got it. Paddy, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thanks for being so generous with your time and with your thoughtful insights.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast.
Thank you. 3 pieces struck me in this conversation. First is an observation about how Paddy has transitioned from one career to another. The way Paddy describes his move from the South African cricket team reminds me of my conversation with Professor Herminia Ibarra of the London Business School. She speaks about the notion of liminality, where she says that you've quit something without fully knowing what's next, and that in-between phase that she calls liminality can be unnerving.
There's two bit when when you're making a transition, people think you go from A to B, but you don't. You go from A to this transition thing, which we call liminality in our technical jargon, to B. So in between, you're neither here nor there, and it's horrible because you lose your identity anchors. And so in that space, it behooves you to be a little bit more playful because you're neither here nor there. So that means you don't have to be consistent, and you can try and you can talk to people about jobs you'd never consider, or you can do things that are pretty much out of character, but you're trying to learn something. And that can be very freeing because we don't often give ourselves permission to deviate.
There are no corporate guidelines.
No. And so the 2 principles are, as you said, divergent exploration and delayed commitment.
Paddy speaks about how his friends describes the executive coaching program, and Paddy says that at that moment it clicked for him, and that was the thing he was looking for. But it's not as if that epiphany happened when he was working with the South African cricket team and it was a clean jump. The phase of liminality for Paddy was when he was working with the street dwellers in Cape Town. That phase created the space for the new possibility to emerge. Several of the people I observe and work with are keen to get on with it and move to the next opportunity, and this phase of liminality can be unnerving. But that's often the dark valley that we all need to pass through before we get to a better place. The second thing that struck me was the piece where Paddy speaks about the criticality of pursuing personal mastery in addition to professional mastery. I think it's important for people to respect you as a good person and as a good human being before they start respecting you as a leader. It was great to hear Paddy speak about how some individuals like Sachin Tendulkar explicitly went on a journey of personal mastery in addition to getting better at their craft. Finally, it was fascinating to hear Paddy speak about how great sportsmen are able to zoom in and zoom out of the current situation. They're able to stay present to the next ball being bowled or the next shot being hit, and at the same time they're able to be contextually aware of how the game is unfolding. That reminds me of a conversation I had with Rich Fernandez, CEO of Search Inside Yourself, a leadership development initiative that was incubated in Google.
One thing that happens when you're in a hyper-growth company like Google that has these very audacious goals is that life on a rocket ship can be difficult. Let's put it that way. So stress levels are high, conflict can become exacerbated, all of the kind of natural human challenges and emotions that we feel in the course of life and work are magnified in a situation in which you have these kind of high growth, hyper growth companies. So I think at Google, people were interested in finding solutions to be resilient and remain agile. And they started to look primarily at the neuroscience around this. And one of the things that the neuroscience started to point to was that there is a way that you can train your brain with a set of useful mental habits to help promote focus and mental clarity and mental stability in the face of many challenges. And the shorthand term for this would be mindfulness, using the skills of mindfulness. Now, this is based on neuroscience, the actual working of the different networks in your brain. And one thing they found in neuroscience in the past couple of decades is that the set of skills called mindfulness skills, which have a lot to do with attention and directing of attention, awareness and perception, and then self-regulation and management, which then also spills into relationship management in the interpersonal sphere. All of this can be trained and in the brain. And the brain actually will change once it starts taking up these mental exercises. Again, this might not be surprising. I mean, I think this podcast, of course, is going out in India, a place where pretty much mindfulness was invented. So this is probably may not be news for folks there. But the sort of empirical neuroscience of it is fairly new, at least in the West. And so what they were interested in Google was looking at the ways that these mental skills change the brain and prepare you for the kind of environment in which you find yourself and help you succeed in that environment.
Finally, just a few requests as we wrap up the show. If you find the content of value in this podcast, you could show your gratitude by doing two things. You could rate the show and write a review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you consume this content. Or you could consider contributing to Antarang Foundation. You can find details of Antarang Foundation at antarangfoundation.org. The next podcast conversation is with Tasha Urich, the author of the book Insight and one of the leading thinkers in the field of building self-awareness, arguably the meta skill of the 21st century. To know more about the leadership and transition advisory work I do, please visit the About section at playtopotential.com or transitioninsight.com. I look forward to having you at one of the subsequent conversations at the Play to Potential podcast. Bye now.